researching and updating the reservoir maps, the temperature maps on the Gulf Coast and East Texas. Our intention is to distribute these maps, these layers, and in a publicly accessible manner. It would be like a geothermal atlas. So people can toggle on and off the layers. They can download some of these maps as well, and they can use their own data to play with and find their own prospects. So the next 5 years to 7 years is going to be really important for all of us to work together in a partnership mode and try to accelerate the growth of geothermal, because I truly believe what we will do in the next 5 to 7 years time frame is going to be more important than the next 15 years. And to do that, we need to go beyond projects that are really site scale projects. We need to start thinking more like a portfolio scale to have understanding of the risk tolerance, attract more investments, and really be able to transfer some of the learnings from one side to another side and make this geothermal deployment at a scale. We need to go there to be able to compete with other technologies and at the same time be reliable, dispatchable, and affordable.
Welcome to Geothermal Unleashed, where we will explore the cutting edge of geothermal energy. I'm Elizabeth Cambre from the Valorec New Energies team, and I'm here to help educate and document geothermal's rise in the global energy transition. Today, I'm excited to welcome my guest, Shuvajit Bhattacharya, who is the Research Associate Professor and Principal Investigator of the Hot Rock Geothermal Program at the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas in Austin. Welcome to the show today. And let's get things kicked off by Shuvajit, you telling us what initially drew you to the geothermal research energy space, and how did your journey lead you to the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas?
So thank you for inviting me to your podcast. Really appreciate that. And so around 5 years ago, after I joined the Bureau, there was an opportunity to contribute to a geothermal project that we are working with the SAGE Geosystems. And the project was funded through the US Air Force. And it was about the feasibility study of a deep geothermal potential in Ellington Air Base, in Ellington Base in Houston. And I contributed to the subsurface characterization, subsurface modeling part of that. It was really exciting for me because I could transfer many of the oil and gas technologies or workflows to the geothermal. But at the same time, there were a lot of challenges and there were a lot of nuances that the geothermal sector has around it. And what are the ways to solve those problems? For example, we were looking for formations or depth that has around 200 Celsius temperature. And around that depth, we have very little data. So you are using data from offset wells, seismic data, integrating those, machine learning, and trying to predict the formations, reservoirs. And that was really exciting, how you transfer some of the technologies in oil and gas, and then you develop and implement new workflows that is needed for geothermal. So that integration was really great and impactful. Yeah, and that's how I started getting into geothermal.
Oh, that's exciting. I actually live not too far from Ellington Air Force Base, so it's kind of exciting to think that there could be geothermal in that area. So you and I are planning an event in Austin. Let's talk a little bit about that. So I'm one of the rig champions. There's 3 of us for the Geothermal Rising Texla Oak RIG. This RIG stands for Regional Interest Group, and we're going to be hosting an event with the Bureau of Economic Geology in August. It's August 14th. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's on the agenda for our event?
Absolutely. And first of all, thanks to the GRC and the RIG committee for choosing Austin and BEG as the next venue for the event. So we really appreciate that. We're very happy to host you and your team. And so we have a full day of event, which is in conjunction with our Hot Rock Geothermal Consortium's annual meeting. So for the RIG event, we have the talks by several people from the BEG, including Ken Wishian on the Hot Rock program. And I will be presenting on the Texas imperative for geothermal resource mapping on the Gulf Coast. And then there will be a presentation from Ethan Cross about the DoD opportunities for geothermal and financing, where a lot of people, a lot of companies are really excited, looking forward to that. And then we'll end that with a panel. And the panel will discuss about the current challenges and opportunities in geothermal. And we will have four panelists who are very eminent in their own domain. We'll have Cindy Taff from SAGE. We'll have Nazigul Islam from Exceed Geoenergy. We'll have Benoit Deville from SLB, formerly Schlumberger. And we will have Barry Smitherman from TextGeo. So we hope to bring several people to the campus on that day. And we're really excited and looking forward to that event.
I'm very excited for this event too, because this is going to be our first Geothermal Rising Rig event in Austin. So it's exciting that we're expanding out of just doing Houston events. I think we're going to have a fabulous turnout too. So I'm looking forward to it. Now let's get back to questions. So I want to ask, you've worked on many different projects that are associated with the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, and other state-funded projects. How has this exposure shaped your perspective on the role of geothermal when we start looking at the broader energy transition?
Yes, many of these projects were highly interdisciplinary, but at the same time, they were at different scales. Some of the projects were more at a site scale. Some projects were like a prospect scale or regional scale, and some projects were more like a basin scale. And so you have an understanding and appreciation of uh, of the value of geothermal for different kinds of purposes, whether for power generation or for direct use, for heating or cooling, and how it can be used to serve those purposes. And one of the things that's really appreciated about geothermal is it's so versatile and so modular. You can use it for so many different purposes, right? And what is also very interesting is that geothermal has been here for decades, and people have used it, and it is mostly concentrated in the western part of the Rockies. But then in the last 5, 6 years, there have been a huge momentum that has been built due to these new technologies for enhanced geothermal, closed loop systems, thermal storage. And so when you combine all of these things, when you try to assess their value, it's humongous. It can be applied at a commercial scale for both power generation as well as for your direct use.
Fabulous. So let's talk a little bit about the Hot Rock Research Consortium at the Bureau of Economic Geology. So what geothermal research is currently being done there?
So as I said, that in the last few years, there have been a lot of new technologies, a lot of new startups that have come in the market, and some of them are moving into the pilot phase, right? And that includes EGS, closed loop, or thermal energy storage. Now, each of these technologies are different, and there are different proponents and users of this. So we wanted to fill this gap of science and tech, understand these technologies, compare them, and then understand the system requirements for each of the technologies, and analyze where in the subsurface they could be used as most fit for purpose solution. Like for example, the locations or the locations and the depth or the reservoirs for thermal storage will not be the same as for EGS because both have different purposes. So we wanted to compare these different systems, their techno-economics, and then evaluate and quantify and delineate the reservoirs which are ideal for either storing the heat or producing the heat. So there is a lot of integration that happens in the consortium, and we work on many different projects with integrating geosciences, then your reservoir engineering, completions engineering, a lot of laboratory tests, then your geospatial mapping with GIS software, and then techno-economics. So when you combine all of these things, then you get a then you can propose a value of a specific technology or geothermal in general in a given area. Does it provide what's the alternative value proposition in terms of, is it providing adequate power that I need? Is it providing power when I need it, or at what cost and at what footprint? So we can compare all of these things. We can analyze all these things when you do an integrated study.
I'm particularly interested in learning about Texas's geothermal footprint, you could say. So you mentioned the GIS software. Can you share a little bit about how this GIS database project came about and the impact that you hope it's going to have when it becomes publicly available? Because it's going to become publicly available, correct?
Yes. So, if we look at any of the temperature maps from Texas, I mean, the subsurface temperature maps that has been published over the years and decades, there are mainly two areas. One area is on the Gulf Coast to East Texas, right? And that has a high geothermal potential. And then there is another part that is in the western part of Texas, mostly from starting from Big Bend and going to El Paso, and then that trend extends up to New Mexico and Colorado, and that's the part. That part is what we call the Rio Grande Rift zone, which is a pretty well known in New Mexico and Colorado. And there are many known hot springs along this trend, and there is a great potential for your geothermal, for hydrothermal or conventional geothermal, and then this next gen geothermal. Coming back to the Gulf Coast where we are, so a couple of months ago, the bureau's directors they I came up with this great idea for Texas imperative for different kinds of energy resources, and that includes geothermal, hydrogen and helium, and many other resources. So we and for the geothermal part, what we are working on is researching and updating the reservoir maps, the temperature maps on the Gulf Coast and East Texas. And we're doing everything within the ArcGIS framework. And what is our intention is, at the end of the day, is to distribute these maps, these layers, and in publicly accessible manner, so that it should be like a geothermal atlas of the Gulf Coast and East Texas. So people can go to the website, toggle on and off the layers, different kinds of layers like temperature maps, then isotherm maps, reservoir property maps, formation maps, faults, structures, all kinds of things. And they can download some of these maps as well, and they can use their own data to play with and find their own prospects. And so we believe that these maps will be really impactful and really helpful to further the development of geothermal in the state, attract more investment, more opportunities for geoscientists, engineers, and many other stakeholders.
That is super cool. I'm excited for that. Let's turn to talk a little bit more about the geothermal hotspots in Texas. So what makes regions like the Rio Grande and the Big Bend particularly promising for geothermal development?
That's a really good question. So often when we talk about geothermal in Texas, um, we are get somewhat biased by the Gulf Coast and East Texas. That's where most of the people live. That's where most of the demand is. And that has a lot of data because of oil and gas industry operating for many decades here. But then there is an area west of Texas, most in Southwest Texas, starting from Big Bend, going to El Paso. There is a sliver of the land, a zone, a large zone, that where we see high heat flow. In fact, they have higher heat flow than the Gulf Coast. And in many areas along that zone, in the Rio Grande Rift zone, we see hot springs. And those hot springs are present along the rift as you go from Big Bend to Colorado. There are many of these hot springs that are present there in those states, and they utilize it for different kinds of direct use purposes. Now, there have been many work that has been done in the Rio Grande Rift Zone, and one of the exciting things about it, this is more. You can consider this as more of a conventional system that you see in the Basin and Range province in Utah, Nevada. So Texas got both. It got those kind of Basin Range style or Rio Grande Rift style the geothermal system, the for like conventional hydrothermal system. And then on the right side, you got the Gulf Coast that is good for your deep EGS or closed loop systems, thermal storage. Now, going back to the Rio Grande Rift, so we worked on a few projects there. One of the projects was right near Big Bend in Presidio project, and the project outcome was published, and and one of them is getting published in the AAPG bulletin in a couple of months. And but we have also published reports, presentations on that, and we found a really great geothermal potential in Presidio County, and that probably sparked commercial interests. So what we have read from the news, like Exceed Geoenergy is one of them, has has shown interest in doing a power generation from their closed loop geothermal systems deployment in that area. So that's really great.
Will you clarify one thing for me though? So you said in the Presidio Rio Grande, it's hydrothermal. And then you're saying in the Gulf Coast, you do more closed loop and EGS. So we are seeing some developers do the next generation in the Rio Grande. Can you speak a little bit to that?
So yeah, let me back it up a little bit.
Okay.
So hydrothermal, if you take in a conventional sense like what you produce on Nevada, do in Nevada or Utah, like we have those hot fluid coming out of the subsurface that is from the reservoir that is really porous, permeable, and fractured. And then there is a recharge of the water as well, right? And that's a very conventional hydrothermal systems. We do see that. We do see the evidence of those things, of those kind of features in the Rio Grande Rift. And we have seen the temperature-wise, you can probably utilize it for different kinds of direct use purposes, heating or cooling. But then on the Gulf Coast side, when you come towards the Gulf Coast, we do have the hydrothermal reservoirs as a subset, because when you are looking at really porous and permeable reservoirs, you are looking at finding those reservoirs at a shallow to moderate depth. And then there is a control of pressure. We call it geopressure geothermal systems, which is a part of or subset of hydrothermal systems. So there are hydrothermal systems exist on the Gulf Coast as well, but these are not exactly the same kind of hydrothermal system that we see in the Basin and Range province.
Got it. Okay. All right, let's turn to talk a little bit more on the technology differentiation. So how do you assess the potential of hydrothermal EGS and closed loop systems in Texas?
So as I said, I mean, one of the main focus areas of our work is evaluate these technologies in terms of their system-wide requirement. And that includes understanding of the reservoir porosity, permeability, temperature, thermal conductivity, and also the mechanism of your heat flow. That's whether it is by thermal conduction or by thermal convection. For all this hydrothermal system that runs by thermal convection system, so we need porous, permeable, and high temperature reservoirs. But when we are working on a closed loop systems that mainly use thermal conduction as the effect for heat transfer, we don't have much control of the thermal convection. And in those cases, we don't really need porous permeable reservoirs, which means we can go much, much deeper and target hot, dry rocks. And some of that may have very high thermal conductivity. For example, salt domes on the Gulf Coast, or for example, some of the very really quartz-rich sandstones have very high thermal conductivity, and they're dry, and we can drill whether vertical wells or a combination of horizontal wells and run these closed loop systems through that. And some of the same reservoirs, some of these tight sandstones could be used for, or even the basement reservoirs, the granite reservoirs, could be used for EGS, for hydraulic stimulation, fracking, multilateral, for well drilling, and hydraulic stimulation can generate, produce more hot water for power generation. So we do look at different parameters, different sets of parameters, and for these systems, and these parameters have different controls for different kind of systems. And then at the end of the day, we produce this play fairway map based on those requirements. So we know in a given area in Texas, or even a given area in the Gulf Coast, we know that these are the areas good for conventional geothermal, and then there are some areas good for EGS or closed loop systems. So, and then the other part, which is important part and makes it different than your oil and gas industry, is about the utilization, because here we have to be close to the grid as well, if you're intending to generate power, nor if you're intending to use it for direct use. So knowing what the end use will be also can help make the maps more meaningful and more impactful.
So in this GIS, this release to the public, will it tell us then this area is good for closed loop, this area is good for EGS?
Exactly.
That's
So,
awesome.
so our team is working really hard in different parts of the Gulf Coast and East Texas to produce these overlays of maps and generate these regional play fairway maps for different kinds of geothermal technologies, including conventional geothermal, then your EGS, closed loop, and thermal energy storage. We're not leaving any one of them. We are working on all of them, comparing them, and what we are finding, some of the areas, we may see some of the areas have a good co-generation potential. You can do both EGS and closed loop. Then there could be some of the areas where you can do only conventional and thermal storage.
Interesting. Oh, I'll definitely have to take a look at that when it's released. When will it be available to the public?
So we expect some version of it getting public probably next year.
Okay, that's great. Let's turn to talk more about some of the highlights from projects that you've worked on. So what were the most surprising or impactful findings from your work on any of the geothermal projects that you focused on?
So there are different projects that they worked on, and many of them at different scales and at different geographies with different kinds of data. When I worked on the project on the Gulf Coast, there was a great opportunity to utilize the existing oil and gas data, like well logs, core, seismic, integrate those things together to build a framework of the subsurface, make a digital subsurface model, and use it for geothermal study, feasibility study. But then when I worked on a project in Southwest Texas near Presidio or near El Paso, the scenario is very different because the geology is very complex, and we have a lot less data and lack of studies on the deep geothermal systems. In fact, we are the first one who studied the deep geothermal potential in the Rio Grande Rift in Texas. Uh, before us, there were no teams or studies were done on the next gen geothermal systems that includes EGS or closed loop power generation. So we looked at the existing data, and we collected new information, new data, and integrated them. And then the approaches that we took in those areas, geologically complex or data lean areas, those approaches are much different than what we use in the Gulf Coast. And so that was a big learning lesson, how you tweak your workflows, how you massage your data, and repurpose some of the existing knowledge for given your problem that you're trying to solve. And then one of the other things we also did, which was really helpful in those areas in the Rio Grande Rift, because we had a lot of uncertainties, we had to depend a lot on the uncertainty analysis because you have a lot less data. You have to take that factor into account. Um, we also came up with different fallback options. If this doesn't work, what else could work? Let's, for example, if EGS doesn't work there, can thermal energy storage at a shallow reservoir, can it work? So we worked on that aspect as well. So you have multiple possible scenarios, and the technical economic considerations that's already there that does help for targeting or citing a project.
So I imagine that you have a number of geothermal proposals out there that you're working on. Can you talk about anything regarding what is interesting and some of the future work that you could potentially be working on?
Exactly. And as I said, I mean, I run this hot rock geothermal consortium. And so what I say that we are not biased by any specific technologies, but we are biased by the science. So what I mean by that, we work on different aspects of geothermal that can include closed loop or your hydrothermal or even integration with the grid or even thermal storage. So we have been working with different industry partners and different agencies and funding sources to continue our research in geothermal. And I believe there are a lot of questions that we need to answer in geothermal industry and to better integrate with other renewables and also the grid infrastructure. And so I have built regional partnerships with other universities and state geological surveys, different geothermal startups. So we are proposed for new data collection and integration efforts across multiple states. So that's a really one thing would like to work on, that kind of a topic that is transcending the state boundaries and trying to make it at a scale. So that would be a really great effort on a basinal scale or a large geography scale data collection, analysis, and dissemination exercise. So that's one of that I'm really excited about. And the other one is also about the the value of geothermal or the potential of geothermal in linking with the grid. And that requires a team of expertise. Wind geothermal in subsurface techno-economics, grid modeling, many different aspects. So these are the two that I'm really looking forward to working on.
Shuvajit, we have talked today about hot rocks, cool technologies and everything geothermal in Texas. Do you have any concluding remarks that you would like to share with the listeners today?
That's a great way to conclude this podcast. And first of all, uh, there is a great excitement right now around geothermal, the value proposition of geothermal in terms of power generation, heating or cooling or different kinds of direct use. A lot of investments and then a lot of geothermal startups starting to work on the pilot scale projects. So so the next 5 years to 7 years is going to be really important for all of us to work together in a partnership mode and try to accelerate the growth of geothermal, because I truly believe what we will do in the next 5 to 7 years time frame is going to be more important than the next 15 years, because that's 5 years time frame is going to determine how geothermal will look like for the next 20 years. So that's that. And to do that, we need to go beyond projects that are really site scale projects. We need to start thinking more like a portfolio scale to have understanding of the risk tolerance, attract more investments, and really be able to transfer some of the learnings from one side to another side and make this geothermal deployment at a scale. We need to go there to be able to compete with other technologies and at the same time be reliable, dispatchable, and affordable.
I love it. That's fabulous. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I want to thank our listeners for joining us on this episode of Geothermal Unleashed. I hope today's discussion has sparked new insights and deepened your understanding of the geothermal industry's incredible potential. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and let's continue working together to unleash the full potential of geothermal.
Thank you.